Thank you. Actually, yeah, I became kind of villain against Korean way. You can see down the website. I'm the #1 searching the villain against Korean way. Since last night. Well, you can check on the website. Thank you. And I don't have much time, so I want to just start my presentation. The main purpose of this conference is try to open new horizons for Asian studies in the context of changing global Asia. So I would like to share this morning with you what I'm thinking about the transnational in the context of new frames of Asian studies. So we moved at this new building last year. Professor Im Hyun-jin did an enormous work to build this building. But taking over the second directorship, I have been really exhausted to fill up the inside. So this conference, I hope, would be a kind of another stepping stone to Korean Asian studies in Korea and also in Asia. So the title of my talk this morning is A Critical Reflections on the Transnational, subtitled The New Imaginary of the East Asian Ocean. The rise of Asia has been noticed in daily lives as well as in the academic world, but there has been a little to no discussions on what kind of Asia we are talking about and whose interest the new Asia would serve. The idea of Asia is very different between Northeast Asia and the Southeast Asia, and South Asia, West Asia, and even more varied ideas of Asia. It is very natural to draw various imaginary geographies or maps, and there is a need for more diverse pictures to be imagined. I believe that creating diverse imaginaries of Asia will contribute to undermining workings of oppressive and dominant power. It is especially crucial to map Asia in a variety of ways and to create a new social formation of Asia in order to fight against the state-driven ideal of Asia. In this talk, I will focus on one of SNU Asia Center's core project, or META project, the Transnational Flows and Networks in the East Asian Sea area, as a starting point to build the new social formation of Asia. First of all, we named the seas on the east of the Asian continent the East Asian Ocean. East Asian Ocean includes lands and seas from the Russian Far East, east of China, including 3 northwestern provinces in China: Korean Peninsula, Japan, Okinawa, Philippines, Vietnam to Indonesia. The East Asian Ocean refers not only to the lands and seas bounded by national territories, but also people who have lived in the place and spaces, their histories and culture, and their material and economic lives. The seas bounded on the west by the Asian continent have been commonly called, as you know, the West Pacific, as part of the sea area between Americas and Asia. Abraham Ortelius, who first mapped the ocean, called it Maris Pacifici, because Ferdinand Magellan, who sailed the Pacific during his circumnavigation in the early 16th century, said that it was much more calm than the Atlantic. In other words, the name Pacific Ocean was originally based on the European sea expeditions. Since the imperial era, the ocean has been regarded as the west of the Americas, not as the east of Asia. In the post-Cold War era, the sea networks that links numerous states and societies in East Asia has been always working under the strong influence of the United States hegemony. Both the TPP, for example, or ASEAN +2, for example, are working under the political, economic, and military influences of the United States, recently China. It was worthwhile, therefore, to replace or remake the category of the Pacific Ocean with the, I would call East Asia Ocean, as the groundwork or starting point to make new pictures of the post-Cold War Asia beyond idea of based on the nation state. But we should be aware that this kind of terminology can fall back into the Asia centrism. To avoid this, East Asian Ocean should be used only as a means or instrument to overcome the territorial division between nation-state in Asia. In this regard, a critical reflections on the transnational is necessary. As groundwork of transnational network, we set the transnational as a category going beyond statism and nationalism, both of which have been on the rise during the post-colonial and post-Cold War era, especially after the rise of China. Real politics between nation-state and the international relations do not allow us to picture the peaceful and prosperous Asia without the supremacy of dominant states. Given the superpowers' struggles for hegemony among the United States, China, and Japan, it is a matter of survival for small, medium-sized, or weak countries go beyond the nation-state and build a community based on cooperation and coexistence. The recent conflicts in East Asia, such as territorial disputes, history wars, and Japan's right-leaning military expansion, sets a mission for citizens and civil society to think about how to imagine and practice an alternative community in Asia. So this is why, a basis of why I would like to reimagine the transnational in East Asia. When we think about the transnational in East Asia, we need to address a distinct epistemological question that makes a big difference between the idea of transnational in East Asia and the idea of transnational in general. Considering historical constructions of nation-state in the Northeast Asia, the relationship between the states and societies of China, Japan, Korea, and Mongolia are very different than the state-society relations of the West. A modern state in Europe was formed based on the clear division between the state and society, or civil society. On the contrary, in East Asia, especially China and Joseon, traditional Korea, there was no clear division between the state and society. Instead, bourgeois society was embedded in the state. In case of China, there have been ongoing debates on whether the merchant class or bourgeois class in the late 19th century and the early 20th century had some degree of autonomy outside of the state control, enough to demonstrate the signs of a bourgeois public sphere. This is the last 10 years debate in China and the sinologists. The life world of, however, it is still relatively safe to say that in East Asia, most of the bourgeois class, bureaucrats and intellectuals existed within the boundaries of the state. The life world of Koreans, was under the umbrella of the state. And only after the end of Japanese colonialism did the market and civil society gradually come forth. Last year, I published one paper comparing structures of the public sphere between Europe and Korea. You can see the figure 1 and 2, the contrast of the structure of the public sphere in Europe and Korea. In Europe, the state developed on top of the society. Unlike China and Joseon, where the state embraced the whole society, European states existed on top of the life world. Ordinary people and the merchant class was not completely bounded to the absolute monarchy. In contrast, in China and Joseon, some part of Japan maybe, the power of the aristocratic bureaucracy encompassed the market and the everyday lives of the people until late 19th century. Japan had not been the same case until the Baku shogunate took control. Despite the recent debate on degree of autonomy of the Chinese merchant class in 19th century, it is agreed that the power of the state was overwhelming. The previous literature demonstrates that Joseon was a similar case, although more empirical evidence would be necessary to confirm such kind of argument. According to the literature, there were little to no merchant and market spaces outside the direct control of the king in Korean Peninsula until the 19th century. You can see such kind of contrast in the picture. To conceptualize the post-colonial public sphere in South Korea as a Kunmin public sphere, it can be said that Korean civil society and markets were slowly developed under the umbrella of the state and began to came out of the state umbrella after democratization in 1987. Long trajectory of democracy movement can be seen as the history of civil society's struggles and growth. The markets were also controlled by the state in the First Republic of Korea. The state took full control of the distribution rights of foreign aid. After the Third Republic, the state continued to practically control the markets under the name of national modernization through economic development plans, foreign aid, and the state industry coalition. It would be the same case in Japan. The civil society was under the umbrella of the state, despite the difference from the case of China and Joseon. Based on such discussion, I argued that in East Asia, there was no such historical construct of citizen that is defined as an enlightened subject of civil society. But however, the citizen of patriotic enlightenment was constructed under the paternalistic state. The common society that works under strong influence of the state in East Asia is significant in our project to reimagine the transnational in East Asia in the 21st century. Again, this is because it highlights the difference between our project and Western thoughts on the transnational, or the Western project of going beyond the nation state. For example, in discussion on solidarity of East Asian civil society actors in East Asia tend to maintain patriotic attitude toward their own country. I think this is very important differences between East Asia and the West. Discussion on the solidarity for the civil society, universal interest, so-called universal interest, is carried out without undermining patriotism of civil society actors toward their respective countries. This is the case where civil society solidarity for universal interests such as human rights, social development, which Professor Dwara mentioned this morning, conflicts with patriotism. it can be seen as the conflict between a nationalized citizen and a citizenized citizen as well. The citizenized citizen, which is like calling this word, citizenized citizen can act beyond nation-state interest and act against their own country's interest. But the nationalized citizen completely acts according to the national interest. This raises a central issue that we should ponder or reflect when we try to reimagine the transnational in East Asia. Let me move to another dimension when we reimagine the transnational in East Asia. Setting a new space for people's perspective, saying people do what they need to do or what they want to do. The sea areas and islands ranging from Okinawa Island, Senkaku Island to Taiwan Island had not belonged to a particular state until a century ago. Instead, people who lived in the region were connected to each other through their cultures, internal trades, and economic activities. Mongolia, Russian Far East, three northeastern provinces in China, the Korean Peninsula, were the same case until 19th century, maybe 18th century. In this region, various nations such as Manchurians, Chaoshenju, the Korean Chinese, Mongolians, and various Russian ethnicities lived together under the loose connection between Qing, Russia, Joseon. By looking at history from the different angles of different groups, instead of singular viewpoint of nation states, we can formulate different regions and different geographies. According to nation-state interest, there can be no compromise in the territorial dispute between Japan and Russia, China and Japan and Korea. Ruling party in each country mobilizes national interest according to their own political interest. Abe administration in Japan, for instance, has effectively mobilized territorial disputes and the conflicts of history and memory. Japanese people have been favorably responding to such a state mobilization as a means of tackling the economic crisis and the post-Fukushima struggles. On the other hand, in response to such kind of nationalistic sentiment, another counter-nationalistic movement in Japan has raised strong hostility among Chinese and Koreans. Therefore, in order to create new imaginary geographies of the transnational beyond the national boundaries, we need to build new citizen solidarity that can survive state mobilization. The national division and reunification of the Korean Peninsula, for instance, need to be seen from a new perspective of Northeast Asia. Instead of the old framework limiting those issues to the North and South Korea relations. The Dandong International Ferry, for example, which travels between Dandong and Incheon, which is port city of Seoul, gives us much insight. The Dandong Ferry has been a vehicle for transactions and trade. Also, more importantly, it is an ongoing mingling space for Chaoshenju, Korean Chinese, Chinese North Koreans, ethnic Chinese with North Korean citizenship, peddlers and small businesses from South Korea, North Korean merchants, and diverse Chinese people. In other words, various problems can be drawn from the boat according to the way we look at the ordinary people in the region and their lives that the Dandong ferry carries. I would like to skip the next two episodes which I experienced last 2 months. Move to the next page, the last paragraph. These two episodes demonstrate what the people do when they need to do or when they want to do. The last paragraph. These two episodes describe what has happened for the past 10 years in Northeast Asian people, market and industry carry out things that they have to do according to their needs, regardless of international politics and territorial conflicts. While the Abe administration in Japan denies colonial history, and then tensions on territorial dispute have risen between China, Japan, Korea. People and things move and flow beyond the conflicts and aside from the conflicts. In this respect, the transnational is performed according to people's needs rather than by the state drive. Lastly, I would like to share with you what we can think about the transnational in the context of Asian studies, which is the major focus of this conference. People in the non-Western countries have understood their own world based on the Western idea of human in society, and based on the social system the West or Western modernity have established. Questions, method, and evaluation of knowledge production, what is important, what to study, how to measure depth of knowledge or quality of knowledge, were dependent on Western theories and knowledge. Many scholars in the non-Western now agree that the dependent knowledge production is deeply problematic. In the humanities and social science in Korea, coloniality of knowledge production, that is to say, introducing a conceptual framework created in the West and applying it to the Korean context, has been criticized for a long time. Now, we need to think about how to overcome such kind of coloniality of knowledge production, and it is time to make concrete and practical suggestions to achieve this goal. Not much has been done, and there is much more to be done. In South Korea, academic associations were founded around 1950. In recent years, around 2010, many disciplinary associations in humanities and social sciences celebrated their 60th anniversary with self-reflections in conferences or special issues of their own journals. Many indicated that it is still a serious problem to rely on the Western theories and concepts and to import research questions and problems. Many share the need to overcome the coloniality of the knowledge production, but no strong case was discussed. The next paragraph should be removed. Sorry about such mistake. How about regional studies in South Korea? Because the professor just come up to the front, and so I would like to skip the case of the regional studies in Korean situation. Move to the second paragraph of page 9 or next page, just before the last page. The second issue. The second, we need to expand such countries' academic disciplinary association into cross-country association. For example, we need to build the Asian Association of Political Science, for example, or Asian Association of Economics, etc. Such disciplines have already organized this kind of cross-country conferences within Asia, but it has not been institutionalized. I suggest such countries, Japan, China, South Korea, Taiwan, or Singapore, that have secured a relatively considerable minimum budget for higher education, take initiative to sponsor the disciplinary associations across Asia. Lastly, this is my proposal of the ideas for the alternative way of Asian studies. We need to make it clear that the goal of humanities and social sciences, say Chinese sociology, Japanese economics, is to make significant contribution to so-called universal, quote and unquote, universal understanding of human and society through understanding of their own people, life and society. I've talked about how humanities and social science in Asia have relied on the Western thought and ideas. Then, how can the Korean social science imagine Asia beyond the national identity of South Korea? It will be possible by contextualizing South Korean society, the Korean peninsula, and Korean people in relation to Asian context. For example, the reason why China and Japan are important in Korean society is not just because those are two biggest trade partners of South Korea, but because they have an impact to a greater extent on peace and solidarity in Asia, as well as on security and welfare in the Korean peninsula as well. In this context, Asian studies in Asia need to overcome conventional regional studies. I suggest the humanities and social sciences academics in Asia regionalize themselves to address the question of Asia in the context of the local and the regional. In other words, historians, sociologists, and political scientists in local societies in Asia should regionalize their research. Such a regionalization strategy of Asian studies can be a stepping stone for Asian studies by Asians. By doing this, Asian studies would be able to perform the transnational toward another Asian categories. Thank you for your attention.